Hi, I'm Janice Kominski. I am a dual degree MACE and MDiv student at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte. And I am joined by Reverend D'Angelo Dia, also poet, artist. I'll let him tell you more about himself.
I am Reverend D'Angelo Dia. I am a poet, theologian, a comic book scholar. I'm a D-Min student at Union Presbyterian Seminary, the Charlotte campus. I'm also a member of the Goodyear Arts Collective here in Charlotte, located in Charlotte.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here with me today to talk about this. I met D'Angelo. We met in September. UPSem had participated in Scholar Strike and had a teach-in, and you facilitated, co-facilitated, co-led with Dr. Becky Davis and Dr. Lynn Miller. You all the Art and Social Justice Seminar, which was a really awesome way to sit in and to dig in. And I'm really thankful for it because it got me writing again, and it had been a long time since I had been writing at all. And then, we had some conversations back and forth about different poems. So when I was thinking about who would I like to, have this discussion with, one, there's not a lot of people who are into talking about poetry, but two, you are so in this and have been real supportive. So the piece that we're talking about is called On Trees in the Body, and it's a lament. And it is a poem that I wrote as my ritual of enunciation for my ethics class with Reverend Melanie Jones. One of the blessings of the pandemic has been being able to cross-register from campuses. So even though I'm on the Charlotte campus and she teaches on the Richmond campus, I really got to benefit from that greatly, getting to register across. And this was the ritual of enunciation before my presentation on Ida B. Wells. So we'll take it one chunk at a time and then we'll chat about it a little bit.
Excellent, works for me.
Okay. Her rings tell an old story in layers of cellulose added 1 year at a time over hundreds of years. The memories live in her cells and those of her stately sisters passed on over and over through meiosis, each cell division reflecting the division in the surrounds. Echoes drift through the shawl of Spanish moss draped over her shapely arms, stirring memories from her Georgia mind. Through years of rains have washed away the stains, whispers still travel underground through the mycelium, maintaining the message, you're not safe here. Trauma lives in the body, not just in the body of trees, for in the lifetime of these 3 men swung from their branches, strange fruit, not grown, but placed by mobs of 100 and 300 enraged white men, women, and children too, in a festival atmosphere with picnics under the shade of the same trees that held victims aloft. Trauma lives in the body.
Wow. I love the repetition of that phrase you selected, trauma lives in the body. I think we often forget that as well, and that we have these moments or these memories that we just go through. And I often say as a theologian that we don't get over things, we just get through things. That trauma is still resident there. I'm also just hearing the reading of this, I can't help but think about Henrietta Lacks. I can't help but think about Ruth, Naomi. So many of our saints are resonating in this work without having to resonate their names. I love the beauty of doing that and the echoing of that. I love this line here, echoes drift through the shallows of the Spanish moss. It makes me see Georgia in a way. I think about Savannah, Georgia, when I hear that line. I think about the countless communities that never had an opportunity to tell their own narrative. And also hearing you read it specifically, your embodiment. Hearing these words resonates from the lips of a white ally, a white co-conspirator. There's something special about that in the lens of the work that you're doing. there's a line here also that stood out for me, and it's because I recently watched the documentary and the film about the life of Billie Holiday.
Oh,
The
yes.
phrase, the line "strange fruit" here.
Yeah.
I believe that is something that we have to continue to remind our communities of. It may not be swinging from trees now, but this is still happening. I think about, I believe his name is Andrew Brown Jr. and Elizabeth.
North Carolina.
I believe it's Elizabeth City, North Carolina, whose life was recently taken. I think about the countless individuals throughout history, biblical and otherwise. And in reference to biblical or otherwise, when I first read this piece and now hearing you read the piece, there's a beauty in this language of being able to give an invitation to people. I know others watching this video, and even us in this conversation, just for Joe's listening, this is not a planned conversation. It's something that speaks to me with you reading it, and the ideal of these moments they're not orchestrated. These moments, it's not, I'm trying to find the right word for this. I want to be mindful of those that are watching and listening. There is something about maintaining the sacredness of what it means to be a child. Yeah. There is something in this Western context that we often adultify children. And when I read the line, women and children too, in a festival atmosphere with picnics, I'm not only thinking about individuals that historically have represented me and whose shoulders I have the privilege of standing on. I'm not only thinking about Black and brown children. This is an invitation also for people that assume this is not a part of their story. When I read that line, women and children too, in a festival atmosphere with picnics, I'm thinking about young white children that have already been socialized, brainwashed, and indoctrinated to consider this a norm.
Well, so there's a few things. That particular line is prompted, as I was reading Southern Horrors and the Red Record to prepare my presentation. I was also, kind of ended up on all these other rabbit holes into different sites where people have taken such pains to document the real lives and occurrences and to say their names, right? Back in time, just as Ida B. Wells was doing. But also there was a cartoon by Reginald Marsh. It was in 1934, and it was called "This Is Her First Lynching," and it was an anti-lynching cartoon, and it was someone holding up a child so that she could see better, and then saying to the person standing next to them, "Oh, this is her first lynching," with the assumption first, right, that children are acculturated into this so early. And as a mother of 3, I find this really deeply disturbing. And I also feel a really heavy responsibility to acculturate my children differently, right? But I saw the trees when I saw pictures of, in a New York Times story about Ahmaud Arbery, there were all these trees, all these, live oaks. And we had lived for a short time in Florida and had live oaks with all this Spanish moss dripping off of them in our yard. And, just realizing, these trees are 150, 200, 250 years old, which you realize the dates we're talking about for the height of the lynching era, you're talking about late 1800s, early 1900s. These are the same trees. These same trees are here in the neighborhood where Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down. And this is not, people want to think this is so far in the past, and it's not. And we're going to hit back up on this in the next section, but with another reference. But and then the trauma lives in the body. My first master's is in counseling. So, as a counselor, I really feel, and as, going into ministry as well, I feel like embodiment is really important. There's so much that's locked into our body, and it will not get out. It will not be transformed until we do acknowledge it and work with it and shape and reshape, examine. This doesn't go away. Trauma lives in the body, and it doesn't just live in someone's body who is a firsthand experiencer of the trauma, it goes generation to generation to generation to generation. And it's what I was struck by in reading Ida B. Wells's work and, revisiting Strange Fruit, Billie Holiday, is how the scenery may have changed to some degree. The mechanisms may have changed, but we're still talking about extrajudicial killings without trial, based upon prejudice, based upon racism, based upon rash judgments that strip people entirely of their humanity. And the church has to speak to that.
Yeah, this piece definitely does that. I feel this coming from the essence of the church. I know it's coming from you, so thus, speaking as an ambassador of Christ and God's everlasting love. It also has part of the invitation here that I appreciate in this section that we've read here. There is not any theological language that could be divisive. It's very open to invitation of those of a variety of different faith traditions. And I think often I've made this mistake in some of my own writing of omitting the invitation of where another faith tradition can see that their legacy of contributing to these harmful events, or their legacy of contributing to destroying these oppressive systems forever, taking the lives of anyone else. Yeah.
I'm going to pick the next section up, and because I anticipate something else that goes in with what we've been saying. So it's in our national DNA, replicated in our RNA rhetoric, unzipping and zipping to take the messages of domination and terror and fear year upon year and transporting them for replication in our bodies, generation after generation, passed down from grieving mother to frightened son and wary daughter. We replicate hate from these building blocks, from the auction block, from the block knocked out from under to running around the block, from a man running through a field or a swamp to a man running in a neighborhood and a trio gunning and recording and ending a life at the roots of the live oaks in Georgia that knew his ancestors. Trauma lives in the body. And the ancestors is in the same county in Georgia. There were 2 lynchings that happened in the same county, one of 2 men and another of 1 man. And I just thought about, there's a book that I'd read, Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlben, German. I don't think I've said it right, but, and it talks so much about how trees communicate and how the fungal networks underground are communicating the messages, communicating threats. And we as humans are always communicating to each other too, whether we're doing so by words or not. And there's that word cellular, there's a cellular memory. I mean, there's the literal cells, but then there's like the idea of cellulose, like film, the images we take in. And we keep replicating this.
Yeah. This all these sections speak to me. I just want to be clear about that with you and for the listeners. 2 sections that are working together for me. Passing down from grieving mother to grieving mother. And I just want to say that again. Generation after generation, passed down from grieving mother to grieving mother. Working with the reframe of trauma lives in the body. And often in poetry, I find myself referencing something in history that is triggering or sparked by the thought. And those lines working together for me make me think about Mimi Till, the mother of Emmett Till. The countless mothers, it makes me think about Trayvon Martin's mother. And not that the fathers aren't present in those moments, but it makes me think of the pain of the mothers. And you had mentioned like, wellness and healthcare and mental health, in your profession. And when I hear trauma lives in the body over and over, it makes me think about the fatigue, specifically racial justice fatigue, that mothers are experiencing countless times. This is This is the theological work that we need to excavate these moments in a way that we're really questioning systemically, how do these moments continue to happen over and over? And that run that you have going on here, running around the block. At first glance or first read for myself, I thought it was going to be running around the block in the sense of someone hustling to survive. But I read it and I understand it now as running around the block to escape the possibility, the same type of running that was done historically for individuals that were on the underground, and a trio gunning and recording. That recording there, the structure, I hope individuals that read this get an opportunity to see how you have physically laid this out here as well. Is that riff there, the physical alignment going on there, from a man running in a neighborhood, and a trio gunning and recording and ending a life. These moments haven't stopped. We just now have access to recording the moments. It's not that they've increased or decreased. They've really maintained the same. And I'm still, I would say as a man of color, I'm constantly processing that and looking for the space to just smile. It does give me hope and joy knowing that these words are coming from an ambassador in the movement, because it often feels alone. So this work, I hope they get to hear you fully read it. So I look forward to that myself.
At the end. Yeah, I think I want to also acknowledge another dynamic here. The lynching, for Ida B. Wells, she was so ahead of everyone else in just so clearly articulating what was going on here and all the false reasons that were given to justify these lynchings, right? It starts out, we're worried about uprising, right? General uprising. Imagine you keep people down for, generations, and but that didn't really come to bear, it seemed all the incidents that came up, there were not white bodies at the end of it. At the end of it, these were Black and brown bodies that were left there, and the excuse was given, oh, this is an uprising, and then it was, oh well, now they're going to take over the vote, right? And so we've got to stop that. But de facto, all the intimidation at the polls, all the extra, voting restrictive laws and things kind of thwarted that. And so then became, I think about Emily Towns, a fantastic hegemonic imagination, right? So then comes in this, well, we have to, because these men especially, but, of course, women were lynched as well, women and children with them. But we're just going to paint this narrative about what is going on here, and that is going to justify any behavior. And with Ahmaud Arbery here, because we've still got this trio with the truck, the one in the front of the truck, the guy in the back of the truck, the guy recording in another truck, there's still, the hearings just happened, right, recently for that. We don't have the trial till October. But there's, all this deliberation about, well, we want to talk about Ahmaud Arbery's mental state. Like, let's blame the victim. Let's paint the victim as an assailant of some sort, or something so that we can dehumanize the victim, the person who has been killed, and then justify the killing that way, and wash our hands of it.
It's propaganda. It's a propaganda machine. And the poetry for me has been one of the greatest vehicles. And Ida B. Wells, she was calling for reform before we really fully understood the term. She was very much sparking the catalyst for what would eventually become the Black Lives Matter movement.
She's an amazing woman.
But speaking truth to power poetically in such a way that is reversing the system of how propaganda has been often used in this country historically.
Want to acknowledge one more thing, even the fact, you and I couldn't even have this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Your life would be in danger from having this conversation. It doesn't matter what we talk about, the fact that we're even talking, right? So I want to acknowledge that as well, that historical power dynamic that still has pieces that seep in. Right?
Absolutely.
In daily living.
Absolutely. I was just, this is a random tangent, but I was just running through a park earlier, and there were kids in the park, and I've just been training myself to not even look at kids in the park because of the stigma and the energy of a Black man coming through. After Ahmaud Arbery, I had to really focus, realign myself on going out and running. My family would say to me, actually, can you just write our number on your arm? If something just happens to happen to you,
God.
at least have your number on your, can you carry your phone? And it's always uncomfortable running, carrying your phone. And so there's these countless protocols that we've created. And you said a good line here that connects to that. It's in our national DNA. I think that the hate and the animosity has become a part of our national DNA, but I also think it's become a part of the DNA of my ancestors passed down to me on the tools I have to use to navigate, to get home. I just want to make it home safely.
Yeah. And this is something that, like, when my son goes out, when my husband goes out, just because they are white, those are not the things I'm worried about for them, you know? I worry about car accidents. I worry about my son getting hit riding his bike, right? But it's a whole different mental prep. I think that, you know, white-bodied folks during the COVID pandemic have only gotten just a teeny taste of what it is to go out and have to think about your every move. And that's only from the virus, right? That's like, okay, do I have hand sanitizer? Do I have a mask? You know, can I get in and out? Did this place have other people wear masks? Do they not? You know, this calculate, you know, can I get all the grocery shopping done in one day so I don't have to expose myself more than one, you know? Or this, you know, there's, you know, do I have enough gas to get me through what trips am I not going to take until gas is back, you know?
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And that calculation, we're only getting a tiny taste of that, right?
Yeah, it is tough. There's a mental checklist for sure. Do I have my license on me? Is my address updated on my license? Do I need a duplicate of my license? One for my wallet and one for my visor, because I don't want to reach into my glove compartment.
Right.
Having the hands on the wheel or the hands outside of the car, the window, so they can see that my hands have nothing in them. We saw these things. Amadou Diallo, I think about him, the Haitian American who was shot down in New York. He was reaching for his passport in his back pocket. So now, because of his case, we've been taught not to do that. Or Rodney King, you know, who was out, you know, maybe having a drink, but the drink didn't justify taking his life. These countless cases. And now for the children that I nurture and that I serve, they can name 4 to 5 people every year of their academic year whose life has been lost. Yeah, that's that DNA that we're passing down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll roll to the next section, so we have some more of these pieces here. From the gallows in the Oaks and in a Paris, Texas field, to a pickup truck bed in Georgia, to an asphalt street in Minneapolis, to the visually screaming threat of a hastily constructed gallows at the Capitol this year. Those who say lynch law was only in history fail to see what is right before them, a mystery of selective blindness. From the White House, past the sycamore dedicated to Emmett Till on the Capitol grounds, they marched, dragging decades of white grievance, flying flags of fear with symbols and slogans of supremacy to uphold the status quo. The images ignite cellular memory, trampling hopes for decency in the grounds designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, with trees aligned to show the Capitol only in its best light and hide the unsightly. Less than 3 miles from where another Frederick penned a letter to a friend, Ida B., the brave woman who called for an end to the Southern horrors, trying to document those atrocities, monstrosities of justice rebuked to say their names.
Wow. I'm sorry. I'm still processing the Capitol. I'm still processing that, and wow, I'm sorry. These memories ride with us. It's hard getting up and going to work with certain things, knowing that it's not if, but when something tragic is going to happen again. I often think that, and I wish my prayer was different. You know, thank you, God, for every beautiful day. But I pray, God, that there's not another life unjustly taken today. When I think about the gallows being constructed at the Capitol, I think about the insurrection at the Capitol, and you word it so well here. I often think there's no way that any Black man, Black or brown man or woman could have had an insurrection on the Capitol and gotten away with it.
Not a chance.
Not a chance. Just would not have happened at all. You know, not only setting up gallows at the Capitol, but threatening to kill a sitting vice president, to hang a sitting vice president. We are the most powerful nation in the world, and we seem like we're often going backwards. Yeah, this is, I think about the sycamore tree dedicated to Emmett Till and what his life represented, and that we choose to do this. I remember also knowing that this work does lead you down a rabbit hole when you're a writer. You go down a rabbit hole and it's hard to come out of it sometimes. So God bless you on this journey. Certainly. I didn't fully know the history of the Don't Tread on Me flag. You know, it's typically this yellow flag and it has a serpent on the flag and it's diced up into pieces. And historically it was a sign, it was when a symbol representing the rebellion against the British. And then we've taken these symbols and turned them into the very thing that we loathe and hate. It's hard looking at flags the same way. I still see yard signs that make me feel uncomfortable when I drive through rural areas of North Carolina. Between where I am here in Charlotte and driving to visit you in Asheville, I'm sure the number of signs I would come across. And having to deal with that, you use a line here, you say the images ignite cellular memory. And having those images, you know, constantly bombard the spirit. It has been one of my prayers for myself and for others doing this work, this justice work through poetry, that we can find days where we can just smile consistently or laugh consistently without having the images bombard us and take away what we know is just and right, that God has ordained for us. And you say it really well with that line, images ignite cellular memory. I mean, to be one image can totally turn around the day.
That's what struck me visually as I was watching coverage of the insurrection, is just these images, none of these actions, symbols, they don't stand alone. They're a part of a long chain. And so when you show this, you're also showing that you know, this, and this, you know, it's you know, and Frederick Law Olmsted. So I, you know, one of these rabbit holes was learning that every single tree on the Capitol building has like meaning and a purpose and was dedicated, and there's a, you know, a whole thing behind it. And that the people who are walking from the rally at the White House actually had to literally walk right past the Emmett Till tree. And that, you know, Frederick Law Olmsted, I'm out in Asheville, so, you know, the Biltmore's here, he designed the grounds there. So for me, and then, you know, I grew up in the DC area, though, that's where I grew up, is up there. And then of course he designed Central Park as well. And so you've got this, I feel like when the spirit hits us with images to say, wake up, pay attention, it's not just one image, right? It's going to be a whole series of images and kind of this coming together to see the connections between them. And there was so much that I saw, it just grieved me and just so deeply.
I recently,
this was written, I wrote this, what was like the second week of February. So I was still processing. You know, all of this and thinking that, like, and then, you know, Frederick Douglass, he had written, you know, it's in the foreword of her books, he had written this, you know, brave woman letter, you know, and it's just down the street, you know, this is all interconnected.
There's a stanza here also that connects with that to me, and I'm processing. I love and this is not to take away anything from the words here. I think they're poetically, sometimes we're called to offer the simplest of words in the most meaningful of ways. And you do it well with the line, what is right before them, a mystery of selective blindness. I've often wondered, we read the same gospel, we serve hopefully the same God. I wonder about that sometimes though. And we are living very closely similar in the same cultural experiences or witnessing the same things take place in history. And how do we come out with two vastly different theological, sociological, cultural outcomes or philosophies for ourselves? How do our theologies become what they are when we witness this? I'm working on a piece titled, What If I Was Your Child? And this line here makes me think about that. What is right before them? These children that are being taken away, whether they're children at the border or whether they're children between Israel and Palestine. There are children. They all are citizens in the kingdom of God. And we can't have selective blindness with those moments. That is a very catchy line there. I hope you use that reframe with something else. I would encourage you to do that.
Well, let's roll it into the next, because it's going to link to another thing that you said there. So, yet still there is fresh blood at the root of the trees. How will we break this train of transmission, this chain of fools? Is it foolish to hope something can reveal, can purge these alleles that make us unfeel the suffering of fellow humans? To take another's breath away is to defy the giver who grieves in moans like the creaking of branches too long burdened unnaturally. Arms should be cradling, not killing. Trees can relieve with their shade, with branches made for good fruit, branches made for squirrels and nests and climbing and beauty and majesty and raising their hands in praise to the Maker. Trees that have weathered the storms of hundreds of years bear the marks of whether they bore life or were used to deal death. Trauma lives in the body, and we who have weathered generations and nations steeped in violence and oppression bear these marks in our souls, whether our hue is of oppressor or oppressed. We are all less than the fullness that God crafted us to be. Lord, have mercy. Lynching makes a mockery of tree and body. Hatred makes a mockery of humanity.
Ooh, wow. I love this image of the tree. I think about, my mind has been lingering with this piece on, and I knew where we were going with some parts. The tree of good life, of good and evil. It was where I go here for me. And this has nothing to do with the piece, but there's something about using the giver there, also in relation to the creator, the father, the mother, the universe, versus using any other word, is to defy the giver. That this life that we have is just that. It is a gift. There's nothing we've done to earn it. There's nothing that we could do to, really deserve the fullness of this gift of humanity. And yet someone has the audacity to smite out that which God has created.
We are in theology. We were reading Grace Ji-Soon Kim's Reimagining Spirit, her pneumatology, her take on pneumatology, and also had looked up a link to her discussing George Floyd. And this comes out of listening to her on this podcast, where she's talking about, like, no one has that right to take the breath, the very spirit of a person. This is sacred, and no one has that right. And God grieves. God groans. God cries out. This is not what we were made for.
Yeah, I was thinking here, and I would enunciate it wrong, so I'm not going to make that attempt in honor, as my attempt to honor my professors. But I'm thinking about the word for breath in Hebrew, the impact and power of these words when we hear them in Hebrew, and the impact and power of what that word means when it is enunciated. when it comes from the lips of the giver.
Spoken
I
into
kn-
being. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot here to unpack for me. I know we have a limited time here. I could keep going. Honestly, there's. I do want to say something before our time goes out here.
Yeah.
On our last two phrases here, and I had a question for you as well.
Yeah.
Lynching makes a mockery of tree and body. Hatred makes a mockery of humanity. I so agree with all of this here. I am navigating because of this. Trauma lives in the body. Trauma lives in the body. The fatigue that comes along with it. I'm examining how do we, as the children of God, as the citizens of the kingdom, keep that hate from becoming our weapon.
Yeah.
If it has been exhausting, I wonder about this current generation, if it has been exhausting for you and for me and for my generation and for my ancestors and your ancestors that were allies. How do we keep moving forward in a way that we're mindful of that hate only begets hate? That we know that hate is not the resourceful tool to use. I worry about the ideal of there being some catastrophe that is doomsday, by being the byproduct of humanity's lack of embracing and acknowledging humanity. These cases have happened, and the lamenting seems to be at a standstill when we're not witnessing. I've told myself I won't watch another one of the shootings, another one of the videos. I don't need that to know that I don't need to see another body executed in the street, but I know someone needs to see that happening, to have an understanding that these aren't just fabricated stories. That's why your titles are so important to me, on trees and the body, the universal nature of the two. And then a lament, I think is so important. I am lamenting. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I've been processing really, how do we keep going forward as the body of Christ and not exercise hate, which makes these last lines here even more powerful and speak and preach to me. Hate, mockery of humanity. I do not in any way want to make a mockery of humanity. But I feel something in me that I haven't always felt, and I can understand that energy with others that I have not always endorsed also.
Yeah. I think of Father Richard Rohr said, that if we don't transform our pain, then we will most assuredly transmit it. If we don't transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it. And I think, this line about these marks are on our soul, whether we are oppressor or oppressed. And I mean, not just people who are stepping forward in some way being allied, if that word is even, there's a question about that, but it diminishes the humanity of everyone. Dehumanizing another necessarily pulls from your own. Every time we blunt part of ourselves, it is not possible to refrain from blunting other parts of ourselves, right? It's all connected. You can't say, oh, I'm just not going to feel, I'm not going to think about this, and I'm just not going to feel these negative emotions. But when you do that, you also don't feel the positive emotions. It's just a whole deadening, muting. Humans don't work that way. So and I mean, at the core, you've got hatred has fear underneath it, right? Fear lies underneath hatred, and this scarcity mindset that there just isn't enough, that I'm not enough. That's, I think, one of the chief white fears is like, someone's going to find out I'm a fraud, that I'm not really all that I'm supposed to be or present to be, right? So we're all living, I thank the womanist scholars for their talk about this fullness, this fullness of living into the fullness of who God created us to be. And you cannot live into your own fullness if you are diminishing someone else's fullness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Circumscribing it. It just doesn't it just doesn't work that way. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for your time. I guess I'll just do a straight read through and then we'll go in, I would say peace, but thought, movement. I feel like
Yeah.
as ministers, it's part of our job, I see, is to be trainers. Kind of like, like when you're training for an event, you help people to push through the physical discomfort of training, right? And become stronger. And I think that as pastors, we are called to help people to have more endurance, to sit with discomfort, to really wrestle with things. And that's where the blessing comes,
Yeah.
not from the easy pat
Before you
answers.
do the reading, I want to offer this up. After you do finish it, I love to just say a prayer,
Yes,
a short prayer to close us out here.
that sounds great.
And I will put this selfish plug in now for whoever's listening. I hope, it's my hope and prayer that you and I could possibly do a reading for our seminary, and that we could do a reading, for UPSim, maybe online or something, or maybe in the community, if that is God's will.
Yeah.
This work is important. Theopoetically, this is really moving in all the right directions, and this work needs to be heard. So God bless you, and thank you for leaning into discomfort to use your gifts to create this gift.
Thanks, and thanks so much for your time. Yeah, I like that idea. You finished with the prayer, and I definitely like the idea. I like the idea of anything in person at this point, which is coming sooner rather than later. All right, I'm gonna take a sip of water before I go. Okay. On trees in the body, a lament. Her rings tell an old story in layers of cellulose, added 1 year at a time over hundreds of years. The memories live in her cells and those of her stately sisters, passed on over and over through meiosis, each cell division reflecting the division in the surrounds. Echoes drift through the shawl of Spanish moss draped over her shapely arms, stirring memories from her Georgia mind. Though years of rains have washed away the stains, whispers still travel underground through the mycelium, maintaining the message, you're not safe here. Trauma lives in the body, not just in the bodies of trees, for in the lifetime of these 3 men swung from their branches, strange fruit not grown but placed by mobs of 100 and 300 enraged white men, women, and children too, in a festival atmosphere with picnics under the shade of the same trees that held victims aloft. Trauma lives in the body. It's in our national DNA, replicated in our RNA rhetoric, unzipping and zipping to take the messages of domination and terror and fear year upon year and transporting them for replication in our bodies generation after generation, passed down from grieving mother to frightened son and wary daughter. We replicate hate from these building blocks, from the auction block to the block knocked out from under to running around the block. From a man running through a field or swamp to a man running in a neighborhood and a trio gunning and recording and ending a life at the roots of the live oaks in Georgia that knew his ancestors. Trauma lives in the body. From the gallows in the Oaks and in a Paris, Texas field, to a pickup truck bed in Georgia, to an asphalt street in Minneapolis, to the visually screaming threat of a hastily constructed gallows at the Capitol this year. This year. Those who say lynch law was only in history fail to see what is right before them, a mystery of selective blindness. From the White House past the sycamore dedicated to Emmett Till, on the Capitol grounds they marched, dragging decades of white grievance, flying flags of fear with symbols and slogans of supremacy to uphold the status quo. The images ignite cellular memory, trampling hopes for decency in the grounds designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, with trees aligned to show the Capitol only in its best light and hide the unsightly. Less than 3 miles from where another Frederick penned a letter to a friend, Ida B., the brave woman who called for an end to the Southern horrors, trying to document these atrocities, monstrosities of justice rebuked, to say their names. Yet still, there is fresh blood at the root of the trees. How will we break this train of transmission, this chain of fools? Is it foolish to hope something can reveal, can purge these alleles that make us unfeel the suffering of fellow humans? To take another's breath away is to defy the giver, who grieves and moans like the creaking of branches too long burdened unnaturally. Arms should be cradling, not killing. Trees can relieve with their shade, with branches made for good fruit, branches made for squirrels and nests and climbing and beauty and majesty and raising their hands in praise to the Maker. Trees that have weathered the storms of hundreds of years bear the marks of weather. They bore life or were used to deal death. Trauma lives in the body, and we who have weathered generations, a nation steeped in violence and oppression, bear these marks in our souls. Whether our hue is of oppressor or oppressed, we are all less than the fullness that God crafted us to be. Lord, have mercy. Lynching makes a mockery of tree and body. Hatred makes a mockery of humanity.
Let us go to God in prayer. God of peace, God of mercy, God of justice, we come to you, God, as humbly as we know how, saying thank you for another day, God. Thank you for another day to attempt to get things right, knowing that even when we get things wrong, that we are still abundantly loved by you. God, we thank you for the sacrifice that you made on Calvary, a sacrifice we don't deserve. God, we thank you for the shining sun. God, we thank you for another breath that we can take. God, we thank you for our ancestors who have labored and continue to labor on our behalf.